Hi everyone, I'm Chet Shah, CEO of Wirex Limited. Very soon we will be publishing our first Wirex Limited Transparency Report. By publishing this report, supported by this podcast, my hope is that customers and stakeholders get a feel for how Wirex Limited balances our commercial aims with our customer and compliance goals. Today, I am joined by senior colleagues to help better understand some of the areas covered in the report. Please introduce yourselves, starting with Tracey.
Thanks, Chet. Lovely to be here. So my name is Tracey Knowles. I'm the Chief People Officer here at Wirex. I've been with Wirex just coming up to 4 years. My role is all things people and culture. I'm fortunate to have a global role. And for my sins, I've been in the world of human resources and talent acquisition for over 20 years now. So that's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracey. Paul.
Yeah, hi, I'm Paul Chapman. I'm the Financial Crime Director here at Wirex. So I look after all the financial crime teams globally. I've been here now coming up for 4 years. Prior to that, 30 years within the Metropolitan Police Service, and I also worked within the FinNet of the Financial Conduct Authority. So really pleased to be here.
Thank you, Paul. Kesh.
Thanks, Chet. Hi everyone, I'm Seegobin. I'm the Global Head of Fraud Prevention. I've been at Wirex for just over 2 years now, and as the title suggests, the role focuses on everything fraud related, so keeping customers safe and keeping Wirex safe as well.
Thank you, Kesh. And Dhanush.
Hi, I'm Dhanush, and I'm the EMEA MLRO and Head of Compliance. Been at Wirex for a couple of years now, and in financial services for over 20 years, focused on the second line oversight from our financial crime processing controls, but as well as our compliance ones as well.
Thank you, Dhanush, and welcome to you all. Okay, let's dive straight in. So, Tracey, within the report, we talk a lot about culture, but to some, culture can be an intangible and often subjective subject. How do you measure the Wirex culture, and can you summarize what outcomes we want from our culture?
Okay, thanks, Chet. Important question. So as we all know, company culture is very complex and powerful. I like to call it the secret sauce for an organisation. As a regulated, tech-centric and also a remote-first business, we believe that culture has to be practical, lived, very much decision-led and not just aspirational. It's very easy to talk about all the things we'd like to see, but also it's important that we're realistic as well. We aim to measure behaviour rather than buzzwords and trendy fads. And I think we very much like to focus on things like how people feel, how they act, whether they stay with us, whether they grow with us. And of course, the big one is, do they speak positively about Wirex? Would they recommend Wirex as a place to work? So alongside those behaviours we like to see daily, the people and culture team also run biannual engagement surveys and also monthly pulse surveys, alongside also a host of other feedback loops that we have at various stages within the employee life cycle. So when there is a positive culture, naturally, we will see high levels of engagement, which will also see more internal promotions, more professional growth, higher levels of retention, but also low absence from a sickness perspective. So I think that's when you really know, as a leader in HR, that it's real rather than just theoretical.
Thank you, Tracey. And all companies will say that they've got a great culture, and you see the posters on the staff walls and and all the sort of what I would term as comments made by senior leadership about, look at our culture, it's fantastic. But when it actually comes to it, the culture itself, it can't be explained in terms of the outcomes that the company is seeking from that culture. Do you have a feel for the kind of outcomes that we are constantly striving for within Wirex Limited?
Yeah, again, important. So yeah, I could go back to that secret sauce, and I think when it's good, when a company culture is good, and we're getting the outcomes we want, everybody wants the recipe, right? And I'm sure we can all point to lots of role model organisations where we think, wow, they've got an amazing culture. But you're absolutely right. Some of that is driven because that's how they portray it. But is that the reality of actually what happens inside the business? So, our culture at Wirex is, anchored very much on our 5 core values. So trust, team, innovation, product and results. I firmly believe that trust and team are the absolute cornerstones of a company culture. Alongside that, Wirex, we pride ourselves on employing exceptional talents, some of the industry's finest minds, and we trust them to do really great work. We don't just we don't just want them to talk the talk, we want them to walk the walk. We hold ourselves accountable, we communicate openly, we create a space for different perspectives, and we very much invest in that strong talent we employ. For me, culture lives or dies on those everyday moments. And you're right, I think it's about taking all those fancy words and the values and all of the slogans off the boardroom walls or virtual walls these days, and actually really thinking about what do we see and feel from our people. And that's where I say culture lives and dies on those everyday moments.
Thank you, Tracey. And you mentioned the core values. Would you say that they are the core principles of having a great culture, making sure that we live to those values?
Yes, for sure. And I think not only do they help us to hire good people, they help us to train, they help us to manage those people. And I think they are definitely the sort of the commandments, the principles that we live by. In an ideal world, I never thought, you should, maybe a head of HR shouldn't probably be saying this, but it would be nice to be able to chuck away the handbook and really focus on being managed by our behaviours and core principles. I don't think we'll ever be able to do that because of the reality of employment frameworks and employment laws, but I think we are definitely guided by our behaviours and principles for sure.
Amazing. Thank you, Tracey. I noticed in the report, you mentioned about hiring. I noticed in the report I think we have a fantastic gender balance within Wirex, certainly compared to most of our peers, who frankly do not. How did we achieve that balance? And is that a deliberate thing that you particularly aimed for within the people and culture team?
Yeah, it's the outcome of intentional fair hiring and an inclusive culture. We focus very much on capability. We try our very best to remove unnecessary bias in the recruitment process, and we design flexible remote first roles that widen access to the talent. Yes, as you say, we've got a phenomenal gender balance, and I would say that balance is reflected across most areas of the business. Senior leadership and highly technical roles, where diversity for me matters most, is where progress takes a little bit longer, and some of that is very much driven by smaller talent pools and fewer vacancies. But we as a business remain really focused on building sustainable pipelines rather than just quick fixes. So, very much our gender balance isn't the result of quotas or optics. It really is an intentional process that we've designed. Our ambition is to be an employer of choice for an employer of choice for a truly diverse range of talent. So for me, diversity goes far beyond gender. Our goal is to create a culture that attracts and supports people from all backgrounds, experience and perspectives. So yes, we have a great gender balance, but as I said, it goes beyond that for me as well.
Thank you, Tracey. And finally, do Wirex adopt any positive discrimination processes, if you like, or is it purely based upon merit, as you said earlier?
Yeah, we very much focus on that fair hiring and inclusive culture. I think we focus on the capability, very much the drafting of role profiles so that they're open and fair to everybody, so that equal opportunities in employer approach. But no, specifically we don't, partly because I think it's a very well crafted and very well designed hiring process, but also retention. A lot of our retention programs as well are focused on that. It's not just about getting certain quotas through the door. It's also about retaining and having a host of retention programs that keep people with us as well, and again keep and retain a diverse workforce.
Lovely. Thank you, Tracey. I'd like to move on now to you, Paul, if I may. You mentioned in your intro your 30 years in the Met, and I think you spent some time with the FSA, as was the FCA known at that time. How have your experiences in the Met and the regulator helped you in your role? And where do you see the need for industry, regulators and law enforcement to work together more effectively?
Yeah, so as I said, I did 30 years in the Met. My last few years was on running a team of financial investigators, and that was primarily concentrating on counter-terrorism financial investigations, as well as other streams. And so we spent our time was spent chasing the money and identifying where the bad entities, where the funds were going, how they were being spent, how they were being raised, etc. And then I was really lucky to then land a role after my 30 years within the FCA in the FinNet, which is all around financial intelligence networks. So sharing information between regulators, the SRA, which is the Solicitors Regulatory Authority, and then sharing it with police, law enforcement all over the country, all over the world. And it is a fascinating world of the ability to share information. Obviously, GDPR rules and PII information, all those sort of rules have to kick in and take effect. But when you're trying to stop illicit actors, bad actors, sanction funds moving around, then it's all around the sharing of information. And that's where you then move on to, when I moved to Wirex, really the only way of doing that is through SAR reporting. And one of the major projects there was to make sure that the SARs that were going out were fit for purpose, had the information that was going to be helpful for law enforcement, and then obviously dealing with law enforcement inquiries as well, and making sure they're getting the information that they're asking for.
So are you, in your current role, how comfortable are you that sharing of information is effective against all the various organisations you have to deal with?
Yeah, so we're quite strict, and I know we get a lot of help through our MLROs, and there's lots of conversations around what a SAR should look like, what SAR information should look like, making sure our rules are in place to identify money laundering and funds being through illicit actors, whether that's sanctioned entities, whether that's any type of illicit actors, basically, that we're concentrating on. But then building on that, there's definitely a place in the world of finance of sharing other information. Now, we have a small group of like-minded businesses globally that meet up on a monthly basis, where we talk about and we identify fraud typologies, money laundering typologies, who's doing what. Obviously, we're not going to share direct information, but it's really good where one business might see a fraud spike, or suddenly there's a spike in certain typologies of money laundering, and we share it. And that's really good little way of having a conversation. Chatham House rules apply, obviously, so we discuss about what we're seeing. We don't share personal information, but it helps us set our rules, and we can keep an eye out on what's going on to prevent illicit actors, money laundering, from going through Wirex as much as we possibly can.
So let's just talk about that, if we may, for a moment. The report showed that last year, you and your team filed around 500 SARs, and you blocked more than £500,000 worth of suspected laundered funds. So from a customer's perspective, from someone who doesn't work in our industry, why does that matter? What is the real life impact of all that work you and your team put in?
So fraudsters, illicit actors, money launderers will try and use anywhere of sharing or moving money. So whether that's victim of crime, whether that's drug dealing, whatever it is, they always look for a way that they can move their funds, because they can't walk around nowadays with bags of cash. So they try and use financial companies to move their funds. And the harder they find it to move, then we're trying to reduce the opportunities of them moving those funds, which means that it's going to be harder and harder for them to do to earn out of their illicit activities, and to just make life hard for them. And that's what it's all about. And then we can report that through SARS to FIUs globally. And then they can take action, they can feed that information to law enforcement then can reach out to us and say, right, we've seen this, how can you help us to identify further, or can you help us to identify the suspects within this and where the funds are flowing? So it is massively important. Disruption is the main key. You've also got the human impact. So the more businesses can do to reduce money laundering, then that's going to have a better impact on the public and how they use their funds. And obviously, we see so many reports of people losing their money through these websites or bad actors, and the more that we can do to prevent that, the better.
So let's just explore that very briefly in terms of what sort of criminality is underway that then has to result in those criminals wishing to launder funds. Just give me an example of some of the crimes that are committed that you're aware of.
Well, I don't want to tread on Kesh's toes, because that's a lot of that comes under fraud. So you have your APP frauds, where victims are being pushed into the seeing a deal that is too good to be true. And we need to tell the public, if you see a deal that's too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true, and somebody's after your money.
I think aside from fraud though, Paul, the report talks about things like human trafficking. It talks about individuals involved in child abuse. I mean, from your experience with Wirex and in the Met, I think it's important that customers and stakeholders are aware of some of the awful crimes that are committed that then where the funds are laundered. I was just hoping you could expand on those a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, child abuse material is becoming more prevalent globally, and the more we can do to stop that, obviously that is a key factor here. Sanction funds, obviously that's a key factor, which I think I'm going to go on to shortly. So any type of, child abuse is our number one thing that we look out for. I'm pleased to say we don't see a lot. In fact, very, very little, but we are always keeping an eye out for it. So yeah, just money laundering funds. I'm just trying to think of what the main key factors would be here. To talk about human trafficking. There's a lot of push through the FCA and globally around human trafficking. And it's trying to identify key points around that. So what countries are known for it? Are we seeing any spikes or any sort of movements of funds that might raise our suspicion around human trafficking? And that's, I mean, you're talking about children, you're talking about victims here that are being moved globally. I mean, come on, you're not going to get much worse than that, to be fair, are you? So you've got to be on it, you've got to be keeping an eye on those things.
Thank you, Paul. And just moving on finally to sanctions, as you mentioned earlier. Look, we have to adhere to sanction requirements globally, and we do. But again, can you just explain in simple terms, why is this important? Why does it matter to the customer that we maintain our sanctions controls?
So it's a way of cutting off financial access to countries, people who are very bad actors. They're involved in war or moving of fire or moving of weapons of mass destruction or something along those lines, where you can't you've got to try and stop their funds flowing. You've got to try and stop the money from going to these countries or to these people. And it's not, do we have to do it? Is this a pain in the butt? No, we have to do it. We have to, and it's not just because the regulators are telling us. We've also got our own mentality to keep saying is we've got to keep an eye on these people and make sure that they're actually doing what they're supposed to be doing and they're not moving funds through us. So it has I would say it has a minor impact on a major majority of our customers because we keep an eye, we monitor transactions, we monitor people, countries where flows of funds are going through. But it's all done within a split second, and we're keeping an eye on all these people. And yeah, we have to investigate every strand of that.
Thank you, Paul. Kesh, Paul mentioned fraud. Now, look, I think everyone knows fraud is a huge concern in the UK. My personal opinion is that until social media platforms are held to account, which because a lot of fraud emanates from social media, fraud in the UK will only get worse. What are your opinions on that?
Yeah, I broadly agree with that statement. So it's no secret a huge amount of fraud derives from, or a huge amount of scams derives from social media platforms. This is where the fraudsters lure in their victims. This is where they start the process of essentially manipulating these individuals. They build trust. They build a rapport. They offer them an opportunity that they won't be able to get elsewhere. And by the time the payment process starts, it's already too late because that trust has already been built. That person is in the mindset of this is the action they're going to take. So it can't be the financial institution's responsibility, sole responsibility to stop fraud. It's not possible to stop fraud that way. It needs to be the whole ecosystem. So this is the financial institutions, it's the telcos, it's the big tech companies. It's working in combination because the way in which the scam works is it's a chain of events across multiple different platforms. So now with the likes of social media platforms and big tech, they stand to profit from this engagement. So be that the ads that they're posting or even just the interactions with the posts, they profit from this, and they should be held accountable. Similar to the way in which in the UK the APP legislation came into place. So it's I guess it's a well discussed topic whether it's beneficial or not, but it's putting responsibilities on their flyers to actually do something to prevent fraud. And I believe the same needs to happen with social media platforms, because without incentive to stop fraud, why would they? Essentially, they do stand to benefit from it. We need something to encourage them and incentivize the prevention of fraud through that area.
And I think just exploring that a little bit more, Kesh, we often hear politicians, regulators saying, we collectively must do more to help fight fraud. But again, I see little traction in terms of addressing the root cause. I know we have the Online Safety Act, for example, in the UK, which came into force, I believe, a few months ago. Have you seen any change in fraud behavior because of that, for example?
Short answer, no. I haven't really seen a change from it yet. Maybe on a smaller level in certain niches, maybe there might be a change. But from what we've seen here at Wirex and the trends, we haven't really seen anything, any change, any benefit from it as of yet.
Okay, well, we'll keep our fingers crossed then. Part of your role and part of the role of your team is obviously to prevent fraud, but also it's to educate our customers on how they can help protect themselves from fraud. Is there any key advice you would give to customers that would help them protect themselves from fraud?
Yeah, so I think it's important to pause and take time. So this works in multiple different ways. So now, if you see an investment opportunity where you've done your research, everything looks legitimate. Now, very often there is pressure put on you to take action quickly. The deal's going to end. It's a limited time offer. That emphasis of pressuring you through to get things done quickly. Any legitimate company or any legitimate bank, any legitimate EMI, financial institution, anything, they're not going to pressure you to make a decision quickly. So always take time. If you do find yourself saying you need the moment, you need the day or a few hours, and the person that you're communicating with tells you otherwise, that's a very strong red flag. And also the benefit of taking time, it allows you to think a bit more about the decision that you're making. Jumping straight into things, you can make mistakes, you can make the wrong decision. So I think one of the key things is to pause and take a moment. Another key thing I'd say is verify the source. So whenever you receive any communication, be that a telephone call, a text message, an email, double check what is the source. What does the email domain look like? If you receive a telephone call and you're a little bit unsure, let them know that you're going to hang up and contact them directly. This way you can be sure that who you're speaking to is the right person, and you're not going to be falling victim to someone that's social engineering or attempting a phishing scam. And I'd say finally, something Paul touched on earlier, a key one is if something seems too good to be true, it's too good to be true. Look, you're not going to find an amazing opportunity that's one in a million. It just doesn't exist. I'd say be cautious when something seems a lot better than what's already available on the market. If someone's offering you 10 or 20% more than the best rate that you see when you search on Google, when you look at comparisons for interest rates and things like that, be very wary of it. Check the FCA register to see if they have the required licenses to offer the services that they claim to provide, and always do your research. Over time, we've seen an increase in the number of scams that are out there. The fraudsters they're getting more intelligent. They're evolving with technology. So it's really important to take your time, double check the source, and then be conscious of that when something seems too good to be true.
Some great advice there, Kesh. Thank you. Have you yourself ever been the victim of fraud?
A very, very long time ago, actually. Well, I get text messages and phone calls all the time. Like, I think everyone gets that. And some of them are really bad. It's clearly a fraudster that's not very good at what they're doing. But then there's other ones that are really good. But one, I think I was probably 18, so many years ago, I had money deducted from my bank account. So my checkbook went missing. This is back in the day when people used to use checks. The check was used to debit funds from my bank. Fortunately, the bank was very easy to deal with and just credited the funds back to my account.
Good to hear. Thank you, Kesh. In the report, we talk about some of the automation we deploy to protect our customers from being victims of fraud, and they include fraud prevention rules. And I noticed we have around 180 fraud prevention rules live at any one time. That's a lot of signals, a lot of judgment calls you and your team have to make on the back of those rules. How do you ensure you separate the noise from the value that these rules are designed to bring?
So having lots of rules by themselves it's not necessarily a good thing. The key is that the rules work effectively. So it's important that we we regularly check the false flag rates with these rules to ensure that we're not just having rules there for the sake of having a rule in place. We need to look at how these rules layer with one another, because a signal in isolation might not be beneficial, but where you're able to combine, for example, a rule that looks at value and velocity, layer that on top the device signals that we see, or the behavioral analytics and the behavior that we're seeing there, in combination, that then becomes very effective. It's important to, well, what we do on a weekly basis, we look at the false flag rate for each rule. If one week it might be performing very well, another week not so well, and it's important to iterate on the existing rules and tweak how the rule criteria is set, because what you'll find is fraudsters they don't remain the same. Their patterns don't remain exactly the same, because once you close one door, they'll start looking for another door to continue what they're doing, because for them there's a huge incentive. Fraud is a massive market. So it's key for us to continually update our rules, because once we've stopped one avenue for them to get the funds through, they'll look for another. So it's all about constant calibration of the rules, looking at how the rules are set and how they layer with one another and all of the other signals that we have.
Amazing work. Thank you very much, Kesh. Dhanush, in the report, we mentioned that last year, Wirex Limited received around about 250 complaints. Now, that's a tiny number compared with some traditional banks, for example, but nonetheless, that's 250 dissatisfied customers. Well, what can we learn from this, and where do you see the need for more work within Wirex to reduce this number further?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few things that we kind of look into. So the first thing is to look at the theme. So with all of these complaints, we're looking at what themes are coming through. Are groups of customers saying the same things? Because if groups of customers are saying the same things, then generally speaking, it means they're dissatisfied with something about our processes, our app. Something isn't working well. And what we're doing is we're then looking at that under the lens of, okay, what do we need to do to improve whether it's our app, whether it's our internal processes, etc., to improve this. Now, all of this comes under the context of our other obligations as well. So, it doesn't take away from other regulatory and legal obligations around financial crime that we've already talked about. But at the same time, there are things that we can do. So, for example, something that came up consistently was the time it took to do a refund. So what we looked at was, how do we improve that process? We looked at, for example, how do we respond in a more targeted way to the customer? How do we improve our communications with them? And that's something that we've been doing in terms of creating better guidance. We've also used some of the themes that have come out of that to generate social media posts, for example, to better educate customers on various topics that we thought were coming up and they should hear more about. So all of these things come together to hopefully improve it over time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the absolute number will always go down, because the other thing we've looked at is, how do we define a complaint? So we may end up, over the year, for example, we've seen an increase in complaints, partly because we identified that certain customers, they wouldn't call it a complaint. They just put through a query, but we could see over time that actually there was an element of dissatisfaction. So we changed our definition to proactively raise complaints on behalf of these customers, and that meant that it held us accountable, but at the same time it helped bring the items to the right level of attention, and meant that we could resolve them in the way that the customer would like as well.
Very helpful. I mean, based upon my understanding, Dhanush, there's a regulatory definition of a complaint, isn't there, which is an expression of dissatisfaction. That's quite a broad definition.
Absolutely. So that it's worth kind of identifying what does that even mean, because that could be, oh, I've forgotten my password, I can't get into my account, all the way through to my funds are blocked and I can't do anything with my account. So there is an element of identifying at which point do you actually, do you consider this to be a true dissatisfaction?
Thank you, Dhanush. I think it's fair to say, based upon what we've heard so far, that when things go well, that's fantastic. But when things go wrong, the FCA are probably first to pick up the phone to you. Yeah. So how do you ensure the FCA are aligned with what is really happening in Wirex? In terms of the context that Tracey mentioned, Paul and Keshav mentioned, and just tell us a bit more about how you see that relationship developing with the FCA.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the relationship with all of our regulators is something that I've put a keen focus on over the last couple of years. And, it comes under Principle 11 in terms of our honesty and transparency with the regulators. But I think that's key in terms of building that relationship with them. So what we've done is we've tried to be as upfront as possible with all of our communications with them. We've spoken to them proactively on a number of topics. Whenever they've come to us, we've made sure that we've gone back with not necessarily just the information they've asked, but even more that they've asked for, which we think would be helpful from a context perspective, or would help them make their own decisions better as well. And over time, what that's helped to build is a level of trust between us. And so when they see something has gone wrong and they want to pick up the phone, the question is, rather than being an accusation, it's much more of a conversation to say, okay, what's happened here? How do we help? How do we better understand it? What can we do to make it right? And one of the things that always helps build that relationship with the regulator is, do they see you trying to do the right thing? And that's one thing that we want to be able to demonstrate, and we always try and do. And we can see that not just from we can see that in both the little things and the big things that we do in terms of our, we've seen a lot of social media campaigns around protecting customers and so on as well. But in addition to which, how we've improved some of our metrics internally, how we've worked to improve our product offering, how we've communicated to customers, all of that has been to help both our customers, but also then our relationship with the regulator to go with that as well.
Okay. And how comfortable are you that relationship is where you want it now, or is there further work to be done, in your opinion?
I think we've got a great working relationship with both the FCA and the FOS. It's one of those ones where we want to continue to be engaged with them and keep those lines of communication open, because when we have those lines of communication open, we're in a world where things will go wrong from time to time. Nothing's ever perfect. And I think you can see that from small firms to large firms. Even the largest firms have, no matter the size of their teams, still have issues. And similarly with small firms. So the question isn't, and the regulators know this too, which is why they've changed some of the way they interact with firms in general. There is an expectation that at some point something may go wrong. But the question then becomes is, what do you do when that goes wrong? And having those lines of communication open helps us to demonstrate that we are always trying to do the right thing, and also be able to, for example, ask their advice on certain topics as well, where we think that we need further guidance, for example.
And you mentioned when things go wrong. I've noticed a few enforcement actions over the last 3-4 months, which had a theme. And that theme was that the company that were enforced against by the FCA knew things were going wrong, but they didn't really do anything about it with any urgency. So, for example, I saw that Nationwide were fined recently. They knew what was going on, but they didn't act quickly. I think Starling and Monzo had similar enforcement actions. So, if something goes wrong in Wirex Limited, is your first point of call, okay, escalate that internally and then inform the regulator depending on the materiality, or do you wait for a steer from myself or from the board before you do that?
No, I think we have this open relationship across the board, and the first thing to do is to start to understand what is the issue, what is the problem, etc. And based on that, we can then work out, okay, how material is this issue? Because this could be a relatively small issue that can be resolved, that doesn't have, that can be resolved over time, and there isn't a level of urgency to it. Whereas there are other issues that may crop up that require an element of urgency, that require us to make changes relatively quickly. And in those instances, the question then becomes okay, what are we going to do and how are we going to work with it? Depending on the materiality, yes, obviously this needs to go to a regulator. If it doesn't meet that level of materiality, that doesn't necessarily mean there isn't escalation processes that we have internally as well. So yes, there are escalation processes internally, both with the board, but also with various committees. So we have a global financial crime and fraud committee. We have a compliance, conduct and operational risk committee. So as well as IT and security committees as well. So there's a number of different committees dependent on the materiality, dependent on the type of issue, and also through an automated workflow tool that we have that we raise issues to. So issues don't just have to be raised by me or by someone on my team. For example, it could be raised by anybody. So anyone in the firm can raise an issue, and then depending on how material we think, it gets escalated to the appropriate people. And once it's been through those channels, we can then work out, okay, what is the next step? Is it an escalation to the regulator? Is it we just need to create an action plan? Is there an element of urgency that we need to deal with this immediately? Versus, is it just a longer action plan that can be reviewed and monitored through various committees, etc.?
Thank you, Dhanush. Finally, there's a lot of talk with the current government about accelerating growth in the UK. And as part of that, they've committed to reducing what they call the regulatory burden on firms such as Wirex Limited. And I believe the FCA have signed up to a secondary principle to promote growth in the UK. Have you seen any tangible progress in this area where we're now being asked to do less reporting, for example, to the regulator, or are you still waiting for that to come through?
So there's a little bit of a mixed bag in this one, actually, because yes, there have been signs where the regulator has seen the mandate from or this guidance from the government and actually moved in that direction. We have seen some regulatory reports that we do reduce, the number reduced. That being said, the ones that we don't have to do, generally speaking, were duplicates or nil returns anyway. So it doesn't necessarily make a large change in terms of what we do in terms of the impact and so on. But what we have seen is a level of engagement with the FCA and the FOS as well. We've seen, for example, an increased number of webinars where they walk through some of the new guidances that they produced and how to implement that in practice, which has been very helpful. For example, the new safeguarding rules that are due to come out in May. Now, that is actually a huge amount of extra work, and kind of in some ways we could argue goes against that growth mandate. But at the same time, what it does do is it recognizes the change in the industry, where there are certain EMIs that are just as large or just as impactful on the UK market as certain banks. So, it's the FCA kind of recognizing that, and also recognizing failures in firms where an EMI, for example, in the past has had to liquidate but hasn't had those funds appropriately safeguarded, and it's now making sure that they are strengthening the rules in that space. So we do understand that. So yes, there are signs of improved engagement, yet from a tangible perspective there is still lots more guidance, lots more regulation, lots more legislation coming through there. So there is a lot we still have to comply with and continue to comply with as well.
Thank you, Dhanush. And thank you, everyone. That concludes the podcast for today. I hope viewers and listeners will receive value in what we're trying to do in Wirex. And whilst we're not perfect by any means, the commitment is there to get better all the time. And also the commitment remains to be transparent in everything we do. So thank you for your time, everyone. And I look forward to speaking with you more soon.